Buenas tardes.
Well, good afternoon, Egunon, and sorry for this slight delay. We like to be on time, but that's what happens when you organize an hybrid on-site and online event, so that we allow for some time for people to be able to see it live from Pamplona. Dear authorities, Government of Navarra, the General Director for the University, Vice-rector, speakers, dear participants, good afternoon. I am Maruxa Arana, and I work in the coordinating body of the Navarra system, ADItech Foundation, which organizes this conference, whose objective is to contribute to scientific excellence and effective inequality between women and men. First of all, I'd like to thank the government of Navarre, of course, and especially the Public University of Navarre and the Navarra Institute for Equality for supporting this project and making it better. I would also like to thank the European Commission's Unit for Democracy and European Values, as well as the Women and Science Unit of the Ministry of Science and Innovation, with whose explicit support these conferences acquire a national and international dimension. From the guidelines set forth by the European Research Area, from the Spanish law on science, technology, and innovation, and from the Federal law on science and technology, it is indicated, open quote, that the gender perspective is incorporated as a cross-cutting category in scientific and technical research, which must be taken into account in all aspects of the process to ensure effective equality between men and women. With the support of the government of Navarre, ADItech has been spearheading this initiative for some years now, which involves actions to raise awareness, publicize, and incorporate the gender dimension in Navarra's research. Today's conference are another example of this, and we are especially excited to see this great reception with more than 100 people on site and 200 people online. Today and tomorrow we will show many examples from different disciplines, and then we'll show why it is important and necessary to incorporate the gender dimension in research and how we can adjust to the requirements of the new European research framework, Horizon Europe, where from now on we have to reason and clearly justify why we have not included the gender dimension in each research project. So thank you, eskerrik asko, gracias. And now we welcome you all, those who are here present and those joining us from other countries and regions, especially to those in the RDI system in Navarra who are approaching these presentations with curiosity and hopefully with the intent to apply them to your research. We've approached this conference from curiosity, from questions, and from innovation in capital letters. We are here to talk about scientific excellence and how inclusive perspectives approach new hypotheses and propose new knowledge, how good science avoids biases that stagnate progress and foster inequality. We do not come to give absolute answers. We come to questions. This has always been done this way, it is too complicated, or this involves too much effort. Phrases that are so often heard in research environments. We've considered this conference a unique opportunity to listen with humility, to reflect, to ask questions, and perhaps to learn something. Those who always have all the answers will never organize or attend conferences like this, although they will also benefit from the inclusive progress made by science. Today and tomorrow, we are honored to have speakers such as Thomas, Prague, Ana de Miguel, Raúl Anguero and everybody else joining us tomorrow. They are brilliant in their research, but also curious and brave for entertaining questions that very few have wondered and pondered in their disciplines, in the fields of work. And with curiosity and questions, we begin this conference. I leave you now with Ana Burusco, Director General of the University Government of Navarre. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maruxa, for your kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to this conference on gendered research organized by ADItech, the Navarran coordinator for the RDA, in collaboration with the Public University of Navarre and the Navarran Institute for Equality. These are seminal conferences which are a meeting point for reflection to exchange ideas, proposals, experiences among national and international specialists, also including institutions, associations from all angles on the importance and the need to mainstream the gender issue in research. Gendered research means a progress towards inclusive and real research. Science, including placing everyone at the focus of all directions. It's the way to reach scientific excellence, which is a priority for our regional government, especially for the University Innovation and Digital Transformation Department, which I am representing here, and we are working on several lines. Firstly, we have a firm commitment with education to foster the STEM education in the female audience at all levels. The female young students will be the future female researchers of the future, playing a key role to include the gender issue in research, and therefore we need to provide visibility to referential female figures. So from our department, we are working on several programs and projects catering for primary, secondary, and secondary education. For example, the STEM Planet program. We've also signed, together with the Women Science and Technology Chair, several agreements to foster the STEM education amongst women in pre-university level education. Especially, we are talking about science and engineering, where we are teaching experimental workshops in school centers to provide visibility to the role of women in the STEM degrees. Among many other objectives, the idea is to foster female students to not rule out these studies and then to fight some social stereotypes, making it difficult to link women to science, technology, engineering, or maths. Furthermore, the Navarran government is working hand in hand with the university, which is a public one, and will be passing the second equality plan very soon, and I'm sure her Vice-Chancellor will talk about it, and they are making a huge effort. Also, the PhD students are already have a gender research subject, and next year there will be a cross-cutting subject for pre-graduate and postgraduate students. And also, we are working so that next academic year we have an MA in Gender, Women and Equality. Also, we will tackling the education of future female researchers, and we are working on the professional dimension in R&D. From the DG for Innovation, we work hand in hand with the Regional Institute for Equality so that the gender dimension is included, and thus we ensure equality between both genders in their promotion and in their professional careers in R&D. So the competitions for technologists, PhD students include this side, taking into consideration specific traits of the bid. For example, 21 women access to the technologist call, that was 57%, and 9 access the PhD student call, that was a 50% of all participants. So we also want the regional agents to integrate in their structures these dimensions. And to do that, the universities, research centers, and technology centers, in order to qualify as agents of the SINAI Innovation Center, must have a balanced mix of male and female researchers and PhD students. And also we have the regional law for equality between men and women, contemplating that any action under the public administration should ensure the efficiency in the integration of the gender dimension must be ensured. Some of the actions are to systematically include the sex variable, including several categories in all the service, research, data collection processes, and then having new gender indicators to increase the knowledge of the roles, the values, the conditions, the aspirations, and the needs of women and men, and to include this in the statistics. Also, we are working on the strategic plan for equality 2022-2027. The idea is to become an instrumental tool to guide the equality policy, not just in Navarra, but also in the local and regional authorities. Also, amongst some of our objectives, where we have the inclusion of the gender dimension as a cross-cutting category in science, technology, and innovation, and also having a balanced mix of men and women in all systems, in all the parts of the innovation organism in Navarra. And this is not just limited to our region, but also we would like to project it towards Europe. The WIT International PhD program will include an equality plan where there will be a gender dimension seeking equality between women and men at all levels, including management committees, in the recruitment and in the composition of the research teams and the assessment panels, in the cross-cutting offerings, and also in the dissemination of the results of the research. This plan will include the actions for the 5 following years, and this might be revised and amended. And to conclude, the regional government is fully committed to provide the female students an open way to the STEM education, and also fostering their careers and working in competitions, ensuring equality of both male and female professionals, and also to have a balanced mix in the administration. These are some examples. This requires some collaboration and working hand in hand with the education area, social area, scientific, economic, cultural areas, to progress and consolidate a gendered research that will translate into a better society at all levels. Thank you very much. Eskerrik asko. Now we'll give the floor to Begoña Pérez, Vice Chancellor for University Projection, Culture, Dissemination of the Public University of Navarra. Good afternoon. Thank you. It's a pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the rector of our university to this conference on the gendered research. I'd like to welcome everyone on site and online. It's great that we have this hybrid format so we can conciliate both work and care for the family members. And in the last year and a half, we've realized that this hybrid format allows us to increase our scope and reach. So, this new transformation is also welcome. I'd like to thank by thanking the SINAI network and everyone working on the network. So that is very valuable to science in Navarre for being the driving engine, the driving force behind this conference on gendered research. So to all members, ADItech, INAI, with whom we collaborate on other projects, and also the university department, who've always supported us, and then also the Equality Area Director, Lucía Martínez. She was especially involved in organizing this conference. On behalf of the university, we are here as members of the network to contribute, but also to learn. We come with an open mind to try and learn as much as possible from the distinguished male and female speakers during these 2 days, and especially public universities. We have a double mission. First, we need to train people, train professionals, and then research, and putting both tools at the disposal of society and the environmental preservation. So when it comes to environment, there's plenty to be done in the mainstreaming of the gender issue. We've made some progress, but we will still a long way to go. And as our colleague said, we are working in approving our second equality plan with 58 actions in 4 areas. 2 main areas are the ones about training people and professionals, then research, and then a third area connecting us with society is dissemination, knowledge transfer, and then a fourth area is of an internal nature, how we manage our own equality within the institution. We are diverse communities with all sorts of professionals and, professors, students, and there is internal inequalities. So, and our plan includes measures for all 4 areas. One of the main tasks was for us to show our own inequalities, our own gaps, gender gaps. So an important part of the equality plan is devoted to make public, as a commitment with transparency, the existing gaps in people participating in the university community. The most visible ones are the ones existing between the university staff and the researching staff. We can see how the professional careers of male and women have a tipping point where women, even though they might make it to stable roles at an intermediate age, when there are some family issues arise, basically the projection is grounded to a halt in the scientific promotion, also in the professional promotion to higher roles. And also when we talk about the difference between male and female professors, there's a clear indication of a gender gap in, for example, also research led by women. This is clearly below the figures of male-led research. So the first step is to acknowledge this existing gap, to then take measures to overcome these issues. Therefore, this is something that we did, not just with the university staff, but with other groups, such as students. Well, we see there's a clear difference in the percentage of male students in education-related degrees, in medicine, physiotherapy, and on the other side, we have the STEM degrees and the existing gap. We see a low proportion of women studying these degrees. Also, our idea is to launch measures to reduce and to close this gap. For example, we are trying to show, to make visible other referential figures, female researchers and people working in the care sector, to see if this culture of stereotype might help students when choosing their careers and to make different decisions. Amongst other research-related measures, we have the education and training of the PhD students working on their PhD thesis, and we think it's a good moment to include the gender dimension. We've launched some gender mainstreaming courses, and these are very successful. Those starting the PhD thesis feel very receptive to this new training. This is related to some of the topics we'll be touching upon over the next 2 days, and then we tend to think about how we can have a sufficient number of men and women in our samples when we are analyzing different studies, or how we measure the impact of our research work in engineering, in medicine. And this is very important when we talk about the gender dimension. And then there are other perspectives, other variables. For example, other subject studies in the eye of the science. Differently to what we've done in the last few years. Generally, we've studied economic development, the market, climate change. So universities come up with challenges and solutions to overcome them, but sometimes we don't do enough research on issues related to the world of life, of care, of dependency, of the children, the sons, the daughters, how to make the housework easier. So there's still plenty to analyze in terms of dependent people, health, but we need to analyze this as a subject matter, and they should be included in the research agenda. Issues that affect women greatly, but also now modern men and women who have a shared responsibility when it comes to dependency, and then the inclusion of the gender dimension is important, and we are aware in this university, as also you are if you are participating in this conference. So I hope this will be a fruitful conference, and we are at your entire disposal. We have an open hand for any contributions, suggestions that you might have, and I hope you enjoy this conference. Thank you very much.
Okay, we now have our remote speaker in Brussels, Katja Reppel. Hello. She is the head of the Brussels unit for European values. Katja, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. And I switch to English if you don't mind. I'm very sorry that I couldn't join you today in Navarra. The traveling was unfortunately not possible this time. I hope next time that will be not an issue. I plan to use some PowerPoints, so bear with me for a second. I hope I will be able to launch them. Can you see my PowerPoints?
It's getting there. Yes. Not yet, but we will soon.
I can see them already, I hope.
There it is.
Good, perfect. I think we're mastering digital technologies better and better. That's at least one positive fallout from the COVID crisis. So I would like to talk a bit about the gender dimension in research and innovation and the novelties in the Horizon Europe framework program, so the European Union's framework program for research and innovation. And now I'm trying to change the page. Yes. And I would like to make 4 points. First of all, I would like to stress that this issue of gender dimension in research innovation is not about social fairness or something like that. It's about excellence, the excellent research. I would like to explain a bit the new approach in Horizon Europe, present some learnings from good practices that we detected in member states, and also mention a bit where to get support in order to implement that in case you are still struggling with doing this. First of all, why is the gender dimension so important? Well, actually, everybody, every cell, every person, most of the animals, most of the plants are gendered somehow. If you ignore that in doing research, the results might actually be invalid. So in order to have valid research results, to be able to reproduce them in different contexts, this is really important. But it is not only about biological differences, there is also a question of understanding all people's needs, the behaviors, the attitudes. And understanding that will allow you to develop innovative goods and services that are better suited to the needs of all citizens. And at the end, your research and innovation gains in societal relevance if you have this gendered dimension built into the research activities. And let me also note, picking up on what Begoña Pérez has just said, if you have teams that are composed of men and women, you are simply much more likely to have the reflex to think, but hang on a minute, couldn't there be something different if you talk about men and women, about the different biological conditions, about the different social conditions. So the two are intimately linked together. Now, I was talking about sex and gender, basically. While it is fairly obvious that there are biological differences between male and female organisms, and this is really something which researchers have understood since many years, I think, that the hormonal impacts, environmental factors, and so on, they have different forms, they have different impacts in male and women. You have to find different types of medications, for instance, and so on. The question of gender, meaning the social cultural norms and identities, roughly speaking, the typically female and the typically male behaviors and structures in our society and organizations, that is sometimes not so well understood and built in. And moreover, what exactly is expected from the different genders is complex. It changes according to the cultures you're in, according to the context. And even worse, it is not only binary. There are people who are intersexual, etc., where all these gender stereotypes and so on, as we have them in a purely binary, simplistic mode just don't fit. So to be aware of that, that is also part of building a gender dimension into the research and innovation content. A bit about Horizon Europe and the approach to this issue. Roughly speaking, gender equality has become a cross-cutting priority. Cross-cutting means we have basically 3 different levels how we approach that. Gender equality plans have become now an eligibility criterion for participating in Horizon Europe projects. That means as of calls for proposals that end in 2022, a public body that doesn't have a gender equality plan simply will not be eligible to receive Horizon Europe funding. The second element is the integration of the gender dimension into the actual research content. And this is what I'm going to talk about a bit more in the coming few minutes. And the third level is that we are looking for gender balance in the research teams. So this is really about having women and men involved in the different projects. Regarding the gender dimension in the research and innovation content, here is an extract from the rules on the Horizon Europe participation. You know, there are 3 different levels of award criteria. The excellence in research is 1, the impact another, and then let's say the organizational quality of a project proposal is the 3rd one. In terms of the excellence, you will see in the instructions for the applications for Horizon Europe.
Katja, can you hear me?
Yes.
Katja, sorry. We are getting here in Pamplona, we don't see fully your presentation. So, and we are getting the same feedback. I thought it was only in Pamplona, but can you just stop sharing the presentation and I will launch it from here? Is that right?
Okay, I tried to stop it. It stopped on my side. Is it stopped on your side?
No, not yet. Now, let me see. Now,
oh.
Perfect. 1 second, Katja, bear with me. Sorry. Just 1 moment. And we go to your...
I was on slide number 7.
Is this it?
1 more. This is it.
Perfect.
Can you see it better now?
I think we all see it better. Yes, thank you.
Okay, apologies about that. The charms of a hybrid world. I think I was on 1 slide before. Sorry. Can you go 1 slide before? This one. Yes. Thank you very much. So the excellence criterion. You see, the appropriate consideration of the gender dimension in research and innovation content is part of what we describe as the methodology. So the methodologies that are presented in the research proposals have to set out how the gender dimension is built into the content. This actually applies to absolutely every core topic in Horizon Europe, except when it is explicitly excluded, and you will find a certain mention then in the call texts. I can tell you this is extremely rare. In general, we really want to have in the calls in the proposals an explanation on how they look into the gender dimension. Next slide, please. In order to explain that a bit better, we drew up, or we asked experts rather to draw up a report, Gendered Innovations, it is called, How Inclusive Analysis Contributes to Research and Innovation. You will receive after the event the full set of PowerPoints where you will also have the active links where you can download the report that I'm referring to, and also apologies for the first few slides where some elements were cut. You will get that after the event. So in this report, You can find 15 case studies covering issues like health, artificial intelligence, robotics, climate change, energy, transport, urban planning, waste management, agriculture, taxation, and even venture capital funding. These build mostly on Horizon 2020 projects. And based on these examples for how the gender dimension was built into the content and was relevant for the results of the projects, they present methodologies for how to go about that, which I think can be quite inspiring when you read that. There are also policy recommendations, which can be interesting to research funding bodies inside the European Union who want to follow that example. And last but not least, there's awareness raising material available. And in the general Horizon Europe program guide, you can find a bit more. But now let's go to the practical examples, please. Next slide. To pick up one, you know, the seas, well, maybe one up, yes, okay. In marine science, the analysis of sex is, for instance, relevant when it comes to predicting the impact of the warming of the oceans. That actually impacts on the sex distribution in the different populations. By now, in the Northern Great Barrier Reef in Australia, over 99% of the young turtles are actually female. And this is an impact of the warming. Now, if that number goes up a little bit more, this species will be extinct. As simple as that. So by looking into the sex differences in the marine biology, you can find very relevant elements that can lead to solutions, as we hope. If you ignore the biological differences, well, your research results will simply be irrelevant. Next example, please. We also had a look into artificial intelligence and the facial recognition systems, for instance. The recognition capacities of these systems depends on, well, a learning. And most of the artificial intelligence applications are trained, well, by the researchers. Now, if you have mainly white male researchers working on these systems, guess what? They're better trained on white male faces. If you happen to have a darker skin, or if you happen to be a woman, or worse of all, if you're both a dark-skinned woman, unfortunately, the reliability of such facial recognition systems goes down sharply. So, conclusion, in order to have their gender dimension, you need to have sample groups that are really varied and really capture the different types of human beings. The facial recognition is just one element, but there are many, many other. To watch out for the composition of the groups of people with whom you are working. Next slide, please. You may be familiar with these virtual assistants like Siri and Alexa. Unfortunately, these systems get something which I thought was unbelievable. Also, some very inappropriate sexist remarks. And they have to respond to that. In the past, the responses of these digital assistants were very elusive and friendly and like the typical submissive female who doesn't fire back on being sexually insulted. As you can see here on the slide, the companies that participated in the project that we drew the example from, they started finding other types of replies to make it clear that this is really inappropriate. And these kind of sexist remarks shouldn't even be made in the context of the virtual assistants. And I think this logic should apply to many of the artificial intelligence driven and automated text searches, et cetera, to really root out a very, very unpleasant situation that actually discourages many women to get active in the digital world. Please, next slide.
Katja?
Yes, can I have the next slide?
Yeah, no, I'm changing as well. Just to let you know, we have 3 minutes left.
Yes. Can I have the next slide?
It's not working now.
Ooh.
Sorry.
I'm afraid I cannot.
Sorry, there.
Yes, I'll speed up. 2 more examples. This example is rather obvious. It's about smart mobility solutions and the mobility patterns. It happens so that there are also, these mobility patterns are also gendered. Mostly women are concerned by having various different trajectories, transporting children to and from schools and doctors and sport activities, etc., stereotypically, but statistically still mostly women, while men have kind of the morning rush hour, the evening rush hour in order to get to work and back. Now, if you're designing a new transport system, mobility system in your town, you have to watch it very, very carefully that you capture the mobility needs of the different members of society and balance that out. So having their co-creation participatory research where you have citizens of all parts of society involved is really, really crucial as a method. Next slide, please. We had also a first look into the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on sex and gender. And you can see in this case study that there were different angles which were taken. In the innovation context, there is unfortunately a negative impact of the COVID pandemic, in particular on female researchers, because they were a bit more concerned with childcare needs which had to be carried out in parallel to teleworking, say. There are also political impacts in the sense of who actually manages the emergency responses, or economic impacts in terms of, well, who are the essential workers? What are their conditions? How can we support them? The care services, who provides them? What's the impact on them? And unfortunately, also during quarantine, domestic violence was going up. So looking into these different dimensions from a gender angle is extremely important to generate relevant research results. With that, next slide. I come to very quick reminder on the gender equality plans. Next slide. In the gender equality plans, which become now mandatory, next slide, please. There are some elements which are compulsory. I won't go through them. It needs to be a public document, dedicated resources. There needs to be data and monitoring, also training and capacity building in that. And then, next slide, please. In terms of the substance of the plans, we suggest to have this integration of a gender dimension into research and teaching content. This is part of the gender equality plan. Next slide, please. This applies, by the way, not only to the research performing organizations, but this also applies to research funding bodies if they participate in, for instance, Horizon Europe partnerships. Next slide, please. There are gladly a number of good examples. You can find them in the information material and dig a little deeper, for instance, in Ireland, in Germany, and there is also guidance materials and toolkits which emanated from our projects. Next slide. You can get some support for the development of gender equality plans, including raising questions also on the integration of a gender dimension from a support facility that we are building up. And there's also guidance material available already. Next slide. And that brings me to the end of my presentation with just flipping through the next slides. You will be able to see all this then on PDF. On our website, you will find a fact sheet actually coming up in a Spanish translation. Next slide. And there are webinars which are available. You can watch them and learn that at any moment from where you want. Next slide. And the funding tenders portal has more. Next slide. And this is the one I wanted to get to. And please send us an email if you have any specific questions about the integration of a gender dimension in the Horizon Europe context. We're happy to be in touch with you. Do follow us on Twitter, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katja.
Next, we are going to give the floor to Thomas Brage and Ana de Miguel for their presentations. Professor Brage completed a PhD in atomic physics in 1988, and he has held positions as a lecturer in research in computer sciences in the University of Vanderbilt. He was also a research in the Goddard NASA Center, where he worked with the high-resolution telescope Hubble. For the past 20 years, he worked for the University of Lund, where she teaches or lectures in physics in the Division of Mathematical Physics. He was also the director of the Physics Division of the Science College.
Whenever you're ready, Thomas, I'm going to share the screen again.
So, should I start?
1 second.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, and thank you, Maruxa, for all the help getting me here. It feels fantastic to be able to meet people around Europe again. So there's some frame there that shouldn't be very okay. So I'm a professor of physics. My favorite thing is atoms in stars, understanding processes, and so on. But as Maruxa said, I've been enticed into also work on gender issues. And in this picture, I show some of the framework, so to speak, that I'm going to draw from. I have up in or down, there is the LIRU network. LIRU is a League of European Research Universities. We have a policy group for equality, diversity, and inclusion. I'm allowed to do this, right?
Yes, yes. Yes, you're right.
And as a Swede, I'm not used to use them, so I'm forgetting them all the time. Anyway, so we are then working on policy paper, advice paper on different things, among them GRI, Gendered Research and Innovation. We have also talked about, we have a paper that came out 2 years ago on how to build an inclusive university in the modern time to make and keep us relevant. Genera is a gender network, and it's a network originating in Horizon 2020 for combining gender and physics. And GenderX is a recent Horizon 2020 project, Gender for Excellence. So now, this should work, I hope.
Do you want me to pass it, maybe? Let me see. 1 second.
So, yeah. So I would like first to do a little disclaimer. I would like to say that I would like to use evidence, of course, and I will bring it from gender research. But here I will not be able to present in detail different type of research. I will only use them to illustrate some for the fields I'm interested in, useful concepts. But if you then want to have a full understanding, of course, you would have to go to the original work. I might be biased toward physics, and there's 2 reasons for that. I'm a physicist myself, of course, I think that's interesting, but physicists seems to be very, very interesting animals for sociologists and psychologists and anthropologists to study. And there are a wealth of interesting studies on physics. But you will see that it's valid for many others.
Excuse me, Thomas. They say if you put up, yeah.
I put it up, sorry.
Thank you.
Let's start with one of my favorite starting points. And of course, if you talk about gender innovation, you can't avoid approaching also or meeting Londa Schiebinger, a historian of ideas. And she's published many books. And if you want to start to look at this problem or these discussions on gender and STEM, maybe this one is the portal. And as you already heard, she's very much involved in gendered innovation. But what she was saying is that, of course, when you want to make a change, you might start with fixing the numbers. We notice that women are underrepresented in certain fields. We want to change that. And even in my own university, we do that. We go out to the high schools. We try to convince women, oh, you should really pick the engineering and science. You should change your mindset. You should pick different subjects. And it becomes fixing the women. So that's very, very comfortable for us in the university. We can sit in our untouched university, in our culture, and don't really change anything because there's something wrong with the women. They don't understand how fascinating and interesting physics is. Londa says we have to go further. We have to fix the way we're doing things, the culture. And maybe, ooh, this is horrible for a physicist to hear, maybe it's something with the subject that also repelling certain groups. This is an indicator. Of course, we have to do numbers. Of course, we have to find where the problem is, and statistics can help us with that. But this should be the focus. And I will also talk, and this is a trap. And with any program that just goes into changing women's mindset will not be sustainable, will be the wrong way forward. Taxonomy, if it had been a taxonomy, these things would be separate. And you could divide up all your projects in one of these. But I will show that the last two in my subjects are very intertwined. So sometimes the sex and gender dimension is obvious. And as you've seen here, I'm not going to go on about that, but when sex and gender is a part of what you're studying, if this is characteristics of what you're studying, such as biology and medicine and biophysics or whatever, it's clear. Or whenever you're applying your science, it's clear. But as was pointed out here before, if you go to this homepage or go to the pamphlet that was discussed, you will see that it's often forgotten, even when it should be obvious. But what about the rest? The research that does not fall into these categories. Can we avoid the gender dimension? Well, there are many fields where sex and gender is not a part of what is studied, of course, or what it is applied to. And there is also in this field a very strong resistance towards even discussing gender dimension. And I'm going to tell you what I mean. Then there is a positivistic paradox prevailing in these areas. And one of the examples that I'm going to refer to is what I call math-intensive fields, for example, physics and most of the engineering. And the paradox, if you think about it, it's what actually drew me into this also. Science is considered as objective. We should find our truth independent of who we are that doing the research, the teaching, or the studying. But the culture of science, the culture of physics is strongly gendered. It's dominated by men in classrooms, in labs, and most of all in the boardrooms, the people making decisions. And this is, of course, a contradiction. Why? It tends to be that the more objective the science is, the more it's gendered in its culture. And paradoxes and contradictions are wonderful for research. That's what we really want to study, right? What we are up against, I have another way to formulate it when I look at my physics colleagues. You know, we do a lot of different interesting stuff. So a physicist that I might meet could be interested in matter and antimatter. You don't need to know anything about that. But the paradox or the strange reality is that the universe consists of matter. Where did the antimatter go? I never met any scientist who said, well, I woke up this morning and I have a feeling that the reason there is no antimatter in the universe is it's always approached by thorough research. But you know, the same physicist could look out in the classroom or read the history. And this question, where did all the women and minorities go? That is very often approached without a research method. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked by one of my colleagues, a dean, to tell him about what happens during PhD. What happens when women and men start a PhD and before they end it? Why do some of them change and leave, even though they from the beginning thought they were going to stay? And I looked through the literature. I worked for a week or two finding answers. And when I presented it to him, he said, well, that's all good, Thomas, but you know, I have a feeling that the real reason is, and then a story came. This would never happen with the antimatter. So what kind of resistance do I meet? One thing is what we call the God trick. Physicists might say, I study electrons and stars, they don't have a sex, as if it was a point. Or I solve this differential equation. The solutions will not be affected by gender and sex. But this is the God trick. This is the idea that we talk about only a small part of what we're doing and pretend that's what we're doing. So we become like God. We have the eye of God, and therefore we are objective in everything. The other resistance I find is the curiosity trick. I'm involved in curiosity-driven science. I do not have to consider anything that you're talking about. My academic freedom says I can do whatever I like. Well, you only need to say, but whose curiosity is driving your research? Why did you get money to steal your curiosity and not anyone else's? So the conclusion is, if you want to define what science is, the only one holding definition is science is what scientists do. And we do a lot of gendered things, we physicists. I will show you that we use metaphors, we use similes, we use cliches. We have a very abstract theories. We need to dress them in metaphors to make them go through. We choose examples. I will show you some examples of that. We name things. If you start to look in how physicists, for example, name their machines, it's very gendered. They are war princesses, or they are daisies, they're little flowers and so. And it all can be analyzed. We represent science with labels and pictures, and I will show you some examples of that. Of course, role models. And most importantly, we choose methods, we choose the teams, we choose collaboration and what to research. And of course, that colors what we do and what we get, the results we get. Just to look back to this homepage, we did a workshop in the physics department at home for one of our divisions. And I'm going to come to which division it is. They realized they had no male professors, they had no male lecturers, they had no male staff except for one. And that was the administrator, the secretary. They couldn't attract women among the PhDs, and they had hardly any women on the courses. But they found two useful methods. Lonna Schibinger came to Lund and she held workshops with those two. What are your research priorities and outcomes? And what language and visual presentations do you have? And the anecdote I'm telling you is about the combustion physics division. They had used in their teaching language and representation, they've been talking about engines. They have been discussing Volvos. And that's fine, of course. But then they started to think one step further, and they started to discuss the impact on the environment of their engines. And they realized, of course, that much of the money they get is to make better combustion for the environment, more efficient. And actually, this transformation gave them two things. They employed female staff on the atmospheric side. And now they also have, I think it's 30% of the PhDs are women. And notice that it gave new science because they extended the research speciality into to environmental science. Another of my entry points, you tell me when it's 10 minutes left. Okay, is, and actually this is one of the first experiences I had with gender perspective. This is a physics textbook. It's American. It's a typical one. We all use them, right? And one of my students came to me and said, "Why do you use sexist literature?" And I said, "We don't. We use physics literature. I mean, how could that be sexist?" Well, we should have been slightly suspicious because this is the first picture used in the book. And you know, when I started to look at the pictures in a kind of a critical way in this book, I got cold chills down my back because I worked as a director of studies. And a week or two before, I had had a very troubled student who was suffering from post-traumatic stress. He was a refugee to Sweden. He had managed to get himself into the physics, and he was talking to me about his problem, just being able to concentrate and all other things. And I think he saw something different in this picture. And I concluded, if you have lived down there under the bombs, this is not any longer just a cute illustration of relative motion. It means something else. This is the picture that was reported. This is Anne-Margaret in a half-transparent swimming suit. Is it sexist? When I decided to withdraw this book on the ground of this and other pictures that I will show you, many said, that's ridiculous. But my answer is, if you have experienced sexual harassment, I think this picture means something different to you, if it's in a physics book. And then I got interested. You know, we had used this book for 15 years, and this didn't jump out at us. And then I said, what pictures, how do they represent women in this book? Here are the women. These are the pictures of real women. So you can see that. You can even look at the color scheme here, actually. But anyway, so they are ice princesses, they dance, and so on. The rightmost picture is not very stereotypical. It's a javelin thrower. But anyway, and here are the pictures of men. These are the real men, the pictures of existing men, so to speak. So men do research and so on. This was not obvious. It didn't jump out on us, to us before we started to collect these pictures. Now, this became interesting. How can this pass without us noticing? There's many other things that pass us physicists. Richard Feynman is one of our gods. I don't know if you've heard about him, but he's also a little bit of a playboy or something. And he has written several popular books. And when he described his findings, he put it like this. That was the beginning of his work, and the idea seemed obvious to me and so elegant that I fell deeply in love with it. And like falling in love with a woman, it is only possible if you do not know much about her, so you cannot see her thoughts. So that's how he thinks about physics. A woman that he falls in love and all these kind of things, stereotypes. It gets worse. He liked to draw nude pictures of physicists, women physicists. So this is, as I said, I felt bad that the message I intended to convey was nobody thinks of Madame Curie, Marie Curie, as a woman, as feminine, with beautiful hair, bare breasts, and all that. They only think of her, the radium part. So this is a typical example of this idea of the bohemian scientist who is almost allowed to do anything, but it goes wrong. And he got away with it, so to speak. How about the knowledge production? It's interesting also. I mean, research on this is rare, but there are some very interesting. William Gilbert, he lived in the 1600s, Englishman. He worked with magnetism and electricity. And at that time, magnetism, because they used compass to navigate. So that was a useful thing. Magnetism was useful. And it was described as something active. Electricity at that, they didn't really know what is electricity for. So they named it after a feminine thing. Electron is the amber stone, right? In Greek. And it symbolized female tears. So also he associated electricity to element, water, which was considered female. So electricity, female, magnetism, male. Useful, not very useful. But when electricity, about 200 years later, in the 1800s, became the most useful part, it was changing. Now they didn't think about electricity as something like fluid, like water. It was fire, it was male. And if you want to know more about this very interesting history and others, you can go to a Plotina talk by Helene Götzsche. If you distribute, yeah.
10 minutes, come on.
10 minutes, oh great, yeah. You can go deeper into physics, and people do. You can go into Karen Barad. She has written a book called Meeting the Universe Halfway. And it's a tough book for a physicist to read, but I tried. And she talks about agential realism. So basically, you can say it in a simple way. Newtonian, the old physics, was very positivistic. There was a stage out there where nature was played out. We were just watching it, observing it, and it was objective, extremely positivistic idea. But quantum physics, according to her, was something very different. It creates entanglement. There's no way to differentiate the reality we observe with the observation we do. And therefore, we have an entanglement of the observer and reality. So the conclusion here then is culture and subject are intertwined. They can't be separated. Culture is breeding certain leaders who makes priorities that shape science. And culture creates an image of science and the scientist, which affects knowledge production. And to understand the knowledge production, we need to understand the culture. I'm a bit surprised. I thought I had more time, but okay.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, fine. So the cultural STEM, I just want to touch on that because it's very interesting then. Culture of physics mainly, but you can apply it to the other STEM areas. One of the things I will bring up is the culture without culture. Another myth is the priesthood. And I will not talk about that, but it's interesting that physics, for example, we have the narrative. We physicists like to think that we were fighting the church and there was a fight between physics and church, but that is not true. The physicists in the 1700s were very much allies to the church. And Newton, for example, was very much a religious man. And therefore, physics kind of springs from the priesthood idea. an idea that mathematics that describes the world is transcendent. It's above the nature. And therefore it's much, much, much finer and nicer and better than any other research. And if you want to read more about that, you can read Pythagoras' trousers. Or it could be a blacksmith. But I'm going to mention something about the Hercules culture and myth of effortless success. Just a little bit about this. One of the first studies of physics culture was done by an anthropologist, Sharon Travick. And she studied 2 different research labs. Anthropologists, you know, they go into the culture, they live the culture they're going to study. Her colleagues from UCLA went to a small little village, an isolated village somewhere in the world. She went into the physics lab, used the same methodology to look at physicists. And she found a lot of interesting things. One of the important things that survived this, been brought up further, is the culture without culture. Physicists think they are so objective in the research, so they are objective in anything. There is no culture in a physics lab because we know how to be critically thinking. That was the idea. And the problem with this is if you believe you're objective, if you believe strongly that that is the case, you become more subjective because you're not critical to your own decision. So I just want, this interesting thing here is that physicists might think that objectivity in their knowledge, in their research, give them an objective culture. But it's not true. Probably it's the other way around. That the culture, who's very much gendered and so on, influence the knowledge. Okay, I think it's time to, should we activate the audience a little bit? This is a study which I think is very interesting, it's sociology. They interviewed physics professors, but first let's ask this question. Well, there are different percentage of women among physics professors in different countries. And these are the 5 countries they studied. And now I'm going to pose a question here. Would you mind participate? I'm not going to get an answer to that. But anyway, I'm going to pose a question, and then when I count to 3, when I say 3, you scream out or you yell out the answer. Is that okay? Who do you think, which one of these countries do you think had the highest percent women among the physics professors? I'm going to count to 3. Please call out. 1, 2, 3.
Denmark. Italy.
And the lowest then, which one of these 5 countries has the lowest percentage of women among physics professors? 1, 2, 3.
Italy.
It's really interesting because what I hear is it sounds like Holland or something. So Denmark at this time had 3% women among the physics professors, Estonia and Finland around 10, 15, Poland 2, and Italy 23%. Almost an order of magnitude bigger, larger, sorry. Why? This is again one thing that can you not think this is interesting? And they thought through a lot of different answers to this. What is it? What is it? And is it a work-life balance? Is the Scandinavian parental leave detrimental to physics professor? No, that doesn't explain the difference between Denmark and Finland, for example. And there's other things. Is it religion? Is it better to be Catholic than Protestant? No. But they did really look through everything. They had to go inside the culture of physics, and they interviewed the physics professors and asked them, among other things, how did you become? What is special with you so you became a physics professor? And they found 3 different cultures. The first one was Herculean. Oh yes, and asking how they came where they are. Oh yes, there is a lot of competition. This whole process is extremely competitive. The case that the department needs to make to the university is that I'm not only good enough for the job, but I'm the best person in the world for this job. Hercules. A caretaker says there's always a team behind the genius. Good teamwork always brings the best results, but of course, not everyone is lucky enough to find a good group. Sometimes when there are very competitive people, it's difficult to form a group. And a working bee is don't rock the boat. Just sit quiet and you will survive. And lo and behold, Denmark, the Vikings in Denmark were Herculean, Estonia and Poland were working bees, and Italy were caretakers. Finland has a beautiful culture, but in this study, it wasn't clear. But go and listen to Sibelius, it's a beautiful Finnish. Anyway, but this is the perception of the culture. When I go to the labs in Denmark or in Sweden, I don't see Hercules, I see collaboration, I see caretakers. But we know that if physics professors have this perception, and that's the story they tell, it's detrimental for the people who doesn't feel they belong, minorities. There are more, so here are just some books about these topics, and I guess this is going to be made available. There's a very important book. I want to finish with one myth, the myth of effortless success. This is a recent book on education, because we can't talk about research without talking about teaching too, right? The good news for scientists and physicists and mathematicians is that boys and girls in school are equally interested in the methods. There is no difference, but they disagree on applications. So that's good news. We don't have to change our physics. We have to change how we apply it. And one thing that when they in this book, they interview women on the way through into the academia. And one thing they found is very detrimental, that we as teachers and fellow students think that an excellent, good scientist can do science without effort. And that's, of course, a very dangerous myth. Because a better idea is actually to tell the students is, this is going to be hard work. But if you do work hard, you're going to succeed. Because this idea of effortless, who is effortless in doing physics or maths or engineering in the beginning of academia? That's the one who went to the right school. It's a strong correlation with what parents you have. And also, if you feel familiar with the examples, the metaphors, and that the teachers are using. And if you can see yourself there, if you have role models. So, excellence then. It's not, diversity doesn't exist in single people. So I just want to give you then, of course, that if you manage diversity correctly, you will get better results. And you have, if you think nature is contributing to science, you should read those articles. We also from LERU, the League of European Research Universities, we have a toolbox. We produce advice papers, and here's one on the gender research innovation. And there will be a conference in Lund, so maybe I can invite you back. And now it's going to be in June 2022. And we had thought about to have it 2 weeks from now, and it's organized by Genera. So to summarize, if science is defined as what we do, we will all need a gender perspective. No one can get away with it, because as I hope I've shown you, you can find parts of any science that are gendered. What is perceived as objective is probably not in its culture, and thereby it needs to include a gender perspective even more. Because if you have this perception, you might become more subjective. Culture, knowledge, production are intertwined. There's a gender studies on all subjects, including the most resistant ones. And we need a gender perspective on the knowledge production to get diversity, and then better and more excellent knowledge production. And there are some references. Thank you.
Damos paso a la ponencia de...
And now we will give the floor to the next speaker. So, Ana de Miguel, she's a professor of moral and political philosophy at the University of Juan Carlos. She's the head of doctorate program in interdisciplinary studies at this public university in Madrid, and she has received the Ángeles Durán Prize for Innovation in Gender Studies, the Carmen de Burgos Prize for Feminist Dissemination, the Prize for Research Excellence, Social Council of the URGS, and the Federation of Progressive Women Prize. She's Comadre de Oro of the Association of Comadres de Gijón. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Firstly, I'd like to thank from the bottom of my heart everyone, all the authorities, institutions who have allowed me to be here and listen to the previous speakers. I enjoyed all the conferences very much. Thank you, Toma. And I'll be talking about how difficult I find to adopt the gender perspective. We could also call it feminist in our research, in our knowledge, in our daily lives. But I think it is a challenge that we can't underestimate. It's a very important challenge, but at the same time very difficult. And I think that to continue with the adventure of humanity, well, we are the human community. We've been evolving for thousands of years, and we have written memory only for a few centuries, and I'll be focusing on keeping this idea throughout my conference. The idea that we are the human community. We've known a huge scientific progress and also a technical one or technological one as a human community that we are. So mind you, we are, well, maybe for a few people are thinking of traveling to Venus in the space travel, and think of this technology that we have. We are being listened to online. We seem like demigods or heroes. There's a huge scientific and technological progress, but I will try and explain that this progress didn't go hand in hand with a moral progress. So we live in a society with a huge human inequality. Philosophy speaks of human beings needing to have a project life to provide purpose to their lives. This is 21st century, and there is what is rife with internet or a new colony in Venus, the space travel for tourists, but we live in a world where a huge amount of people don't have the option to have a life project. I'm not saying that some progresses were made, but these are supported in the scientific and technical character. Today, human inequality is huge. It is different to what it used to be in the Plato and Aristotle times when slavery was legal, but today we still have slavery, and that is in the light of the huge process that can't be allowed. We all know this. So what I would like to explain here today, even though I might seem very assertive, I'm just trying to bring up new ideas for the debate. I don't have the answers, but I have questions I come up with in all earnest.
I shall argue that the main cause, the fundamental cause, and that is based on my research, the main cause for that science and technology progress being so strong but not paralleled by moral development has a lot to do with inequalities between men and women. That's why I'm here. I believe, and very many others do as well, I believe that inequalities between men and women is a school for human inequality, a paramount barrier to moral progress, and one that has deformed what we call scientific and technological progress, to the extent that the little turtles that we saw earlier, mentioned by Katja, those little turtles and the warming of the planet will put an end to the human adventure. In Spain, Thomas, there are no children being born, like Schopenhauer, the philosopher, said. You know, the wise man stops reproduction and so puts an end to human suffrage. And then the young girls come, crafty girls who come and deceive wise men for them to accept to be reproduced. And then they ensure reproduction, but then when the baby has been born, the wise man sees the young girl at home taking over, taking control, but the wise man knew better. No, no, no. All philosophers are very similar. It was not only Schopenhauer's. You know, it wasn't only Schopenhauer, okay? No, it was all of them, all male philosophers at the time. And the experience of being a woman and doing philosophy or researching in the 21st century is a tragic experience, because we no longer know how to relate to our own philosophical, literary, artistic tradition. A cultural tradition that constituted us with its concepts, its dream, its art, but those that constituted us, Plato, Aristotle, Schopenhauer, Kant, Hume, Adam Smith, Darwin, all those geniuses who told us who we were, because that's what philosophy is all about, to know who you are and what you want to do in the world. They taught us to be who we are, and at the same time, we, women, learned that we are the material, symbolic condition for their possibility to do what they did. We had to be given up. We had to be sacrificed. We, half of the human population, not only they did so, you know, Darwin is a scientist, but he is also a thinker. He's also a philosopher. All of them who constituted us as people, as individuals, because we think with their concepts, whether they are philosophers, writers, artists, painters, they all completed philosophical works or artistic works to demonstrate, to prove that women were fine where they were in ancient times, since ancient times, at the service of their life projects, at the service of half of the human race, of their dreams, their technology and science. The imbalance that has given way to this inequality in the adventure of humankind is massive, is huge. Flora Tristan, the philosopher, wrote, all unfortunate events in humankind come from the oblivion of women's rights. Well, to some extent today, we are just opening our eyes in the 21st century to try and prove with our research that they were right, or she was right, sorry. Okay, after this very long introduction of mine, I would like to give you specific examples in history about the huge problem we have to exit a world in which the confines of that world are made up by science, technology, and the meaning of life in a patriarchal way. This world was not built by us women. How were we to build a world where we would be banned as the Greeks did? You know, the thinkers, you know, the great thinkers, where we were banned from writing, thinking, going to school. How on earth would we, women, create a world where we would ban ourselves from all those things? No, we didn't. We did not build that world. Those who dictated what was good and evil were men. Those who dreamed of the world were men, were male. We don't even know what our dreams are. And let me tell you something. To dream about something is the very beginning of innovation, of any science, of any technology. Man dreamed of flying, and it was a man, Daedalus and Icarus in the Greek mythology, and then it was Da Vinci in the Renaissance. You tell me what women dreamt of flying. All scientific breakthroughs, even literature to philosophy, art, all of it comes from a dream, a longing. And so you want to be unafraid or not so afraid, and in the end you discover fire, you discover weapons and arms. We were told it was a hunter who discovered weapons. How come? Were you there to check that up? Wouldn't it be more logical, more consistent to think that fire, architecture, a roof, a shelter to protect you, agriculture, a language? We were told it was invented by males going after mammoths for them to arrange, you know, the perfect strategy. You go there, I'll do the hunting here, I will go after the mammoth from this other angle. Yes, they came up with language, didn't they? No, all these stories, isn't it more logical to think that if mothers at the time were taking care of their offspring, you know, 10, 11, 13 children, wouldn't they have wanted to warn them about dangers, to prevent them from falling into the river, from being prey to these animals? Wouldn't they invent speech, you know, language, and instead of telling them, please don't eat that, that's you know, poo-poo or whatever? Did someone think about that idea? Well, the great Marxist philosopher Alexander de Magal did think about that. I did my PhD thesis, my dissertation, when I was 24, about a female thinker. She's not deemed to be a philosopher, Alexandra Kolobai. I was so amazed when I read her books. She said, we have been caused to think that males were the pioneers of our world because they were the hunters, they were mammoth hunters. Well, if you go after a mammoth, you are not likely to develop, you know, human skills such as observation, induction, generalization, these being synonymous with knowledge. Isn't it more logical that we women develop such skills, or women who were still at home, in, you know, watching how grass would grow? No, I'm kidding, I'm joking, but watching, observing all around how nature worked? We have been told many stories, many fairy tales, and isn't it complicated to run away from a set of beliefs? It is difficult. That's why philosophy analyzes it. You know, the same is done by religion, for instance. What actually makes you a human? When I say to me, to us, we women, we analyze what we are constituted of. And it's so complicated to move away from anthropocentrism. All of our culture, human, artistic, culture is all androcentrism, which means identifying a neutral human being with the male, and the male with a neutral human being, and the identification of a woman with a neutral being being utterly impossible. But that's the problem we're faced with in science, in knowledge. And as a human, and that is vital to us because that helps us bring meaning to our lives. And number two, it helps us do what we really want to do. Okay, let me give you an example of a book I just published. It is entitled, and I meant to do so, Ethics for Celia. I am a professor in philosophy. I'm not a philosopher. I don't say I am a philosopher, but I sometimes stand up, I say women are to have their own epics, and men call, the footballer that passed away recently, they called him God. Maradona is God. Everybody agrees with that. So there's loads of competition out there. But it's so clear to them, so let's have a little bit of epics, we women. Yes, I am a female philosopher, with an A in Spanish. And sometimes, they come and tell me, Anna, that's great to have a book on ethics for girls. So I go and say, who on earth told you my book is intended for women? Anna, how good, an ethics book for women. And now that feminism is all so trendy. So, no, are you telling me that ethics, the book by Aristotle, the philosopher. Aristotle is the philosopher. I'm also a philosopher. Well, he was called the philosopher for 14th, 15th, 16th, 19th centuries. The philosopher, just the one and only Aristotle. So, Etica Nicomachus was the book written by Aristotle to his son, the founder of ethics. Ethics is a very, very important part of philosophy. Ethics is all about being sympathetic, being empathetic, be in someone else's shoes. That is ethics about. So Etica or Ethics for Nicomachus was a book for boys then? No. Then if you give if you do say that, then people understand. No, it's not a book for women. It's a book intended for philosophy students, for my students. So Ética para Celia, Ethics for Celia, is it a book for girls? How come? People can think my book is a book on ethics for girls when Aristotle, who already wrote before, the same way Aristotle wrote, before Christ. And here we go, we keep on and on and on. We call ourselves people, but we are not people. We're not, human beings. As far as a book entitled Ethics or for Celia is considered to be a book for women, a book for girls. We are out of the question. We are out of the concept of humankind, which is definitely outrageous, absolutely outrageous. We are not yet identified with the neutral human being, and yet numerous books are published, on the same premises, society of tiredness, philosophy bestseller. But we had been there for years on end saying women were exhausted with that double shift, and in not only that, having to be activists too from social movements and political parties. Of course, we were exhausted. We were knackered. And now, yes, we talk about the society of tiredness, of exhaustion, because the men, seem to start being a little bit tired after Well, the problem with androcentrism, I know you are familiar with it, of course, but you want to realize how difficult it is to fight it and to leave it behind you. It is very strong a barrier, and it is a sheer philosophical thing. And the premise is there, the identification of the male with the neutral human being, and we women fail to do such an identification. Okay, here I go. Changing the subject completely. Well, no, I shall not do that. I'm already resigned. I know I have very little time. I should have some calmness. But let me go back to Hercules and the example by Thomas. Philosophy analyzes stories and narratives that bring meaning to our lives, that tell us what is worth, what is good. But remember, women didn't build this world. We never contributed our thoughts to define what is good and worth. And we do have to have our own idea. Let me give you an example. Odyssey or Iliad. Zeus. Our story will not match theirs because Zeus is the super god, the top of the pops, in Greek mythology. Plato would say, with Homer, we learn what is good and what is bad. Zeus is a rapist god. Zeus is a rapist God, but because he is God, he is the rule, the standard of what is good and what is worth. We, women of the 21st century, what shall we do with Greek myths? Shall we give them to our boys and girls? Stop playing with your little machine. Read this book. What are we doing if we give our girls that book? The standard of the good and the worth is that there is a God there who is a rapist, and his wife had been betrayed by Zeus. So the question is, which is a good question, because it applies to Rousseau, to Kant, to Hobbes. How are we to relate to this tradition that makes us, that constitutes us formally in school, in high school, and in university? Our experience is a tragic feeling of life. On the one hand, we have a human normal being, for instance, Kierkegaard, the philosopher, or Unamuno, the writer, who wrote the tragic notion of life. We are contradictory beings, but how precious life is. We will know after we die, how difficult it is to bring together, to come to terms with your feelings when you think with your brain. That's all fine, but we women have to face a double shift concerning anxiety, because we are anxious because we cannot relate to Homer, whom we read when we were little girls. And we loved Homer when we were little girls, when we were children, because they taught us there were three goddesses, the greatest goddesses possible. And those goddesses there were just having a terrible row to be the prettiest god. Yes, Homer was very, very cheeky and played tricks on us. And we had to study Homer in university because we had to study our tradition, because it is a constitutive tradition to us. But what shall we do in the 21st century? We shall read both works by Homer, but in a most critical way, taking into account how the dream was designed for Ulysses to go on a voyage of knowledge, of science, while his wife had to weave and unweave for 20 years till he came back. So human beings have a tendency to go and find adventure, but they also have a stronger tendency, survival and safety. And so half of the human race, we, women, were deprived of it knowingly. We were deprived of it knowingly, because there you have the texts and the writings. They deprived us on what they define as good as and worthy. If Aristotle defined politics and thinking as something natural to human beings, something inherent to human beings that makes your life worth living, we were forbidden it. If Greeks defended sports and the Olympic Games as something that was highly valuable to human beings and relationships between peoples, they were all the time, they were in wars all the time. But I tell you what, it's not by chance that we didn't have a role to play there. Yes, it was all wars, and battles, but the Olympics came and sports were so lovely, and even more if you were naked, the discobolo, men's worth and virile beauty. So truce, stop. Loudspeakers, let's have a truce so that sportsmen can travel. What about women? Women couldn't do any sports. Women couldn't go to the Olympic Games. What type of humankind is that? There is a philosopher, Nietzsche, and my students love him, by the way. He refers to pudenda uringo in Latin, the foul smell of our origins, okay? Remember, I'm talking about Nietzsche. Origins hurt, particularly with Nietzsche, but not because of what you think, niche, but because inequalities between men and women are found at the very, very roots of the homonizing process, as Darwin put it. Darwin said women don't evolve. So, well, it's really pathetic. It certainly is. I'm sorry, wherever you go, whatever author you resort to, Darwin says it's just as well that thanks to genetic laws and rules, just as well, daughters also inherit half of their genome from the fathers. Just as well, the fathers were there to give their daughters a more developed side for women to catch up. It's a lovely verb, isn't it? We women could catch up with men a little bit, concerning evolution, though Darwin explicitly says that even though, and thanks to that inheritance from our dads, even so, we are absolutely inferior to them. In many cases, Darwin says, and in those things that are typical of women, when we men do them, we are so much better. At sewing, for instance. Well, that's my own example. Okay, who are the great, fashion designers? Think about them. We are not good at what we are good. Sewing, cooking, the masters of the universe are the men. Running out of time, just two ideas. That hurtful origin, that foul smell from sewage systems, it's reaching us too, and we don't know how to relate to our culture anymore. But we do know that the bad smell and the bad truck, because it is a bad truck. You need to be blind that scientific development without moral development is a totally dystopic future. Right, the very concept of human being built by men only because they did it on their own, that very concept itself is absolutely wrong. The objectivity is not possible because the very concept of a human being they build is wrong. Okay, one at a time. Aristotle. Sorry for Aristotle, but I do love him. In fact, we are so incapable, we women, that we cannot have children. We're just the recipient, you know, the oven for the bun in the oven. That's why they carry the dad's surname, the father's surname, because they provided the form. We provided the matter. We water, and we know that in Aristotle's philosophy, the form is so much superior to matter. It was explicitly said by Aristotle, no doubt whatsoever. And you have to pass philosophy in high school. So let's study Aristotle in detail. Yeah, why not? We love him so dearly. He's a sweetheart. As Amelia Barcastle puts it, don't be picky with Aristotle because he brought us to this world. I call him the great classifier. I classify everything. This is a plant, this is an animal, this moves, this is a static, this is a man, this is a woman. Women are inferior, men are superior. And there you go. Etika Nikomako in Greek was a book of ethics just for men, because for Aristotle, women were intellectually inferior. Of course, we wouldn't even be addressed. But the very concept of human beings produced by the Western world, by our civilization, is wrong. Men thought themselves, as Aristotle says, in society, men are social by nature because they go to the agora and they speak about politics. They participate in democracy. They like making friends. Why? Well, Aristotle has 2 chapters on friendship in his ethics book, none on family. None on the family. And today, with my gaze, you know, to me, I think, you know, everybody who have children, having a family is one of the most important things in your life. It's meaningful to a person's life. Well, Aristotle forgot that tiny detail. You know, what was important to him was friendship. 2 whole chapters when he talks about the good life, leading a good life to his son. So, Mr. Philosopher, you forgot that people have children, people have families, so to me, that doesn't make him a very good philosopher, because he neglected that little piece of information. He forgot about the caregiver, the child rearer. If he was able to write and have a dozen children, why did he do that? Because half of the human race was silenced, was subjugated to take care of domestic chores and child rearing, because, you know, if that was not the case, if that were not the case, well, humans would have become extinct. But then, you know, there's Aristotle, there's Adam Smith and modern capitalism. Who am I to pay this steak on my plate? Well, it's not down to the butchers, it's down to the butcher's interest. Thank you, Mr. Butcher, for trying to make private profit, and in that way I have a steak on my plate. And then the great Adam Smith says, the market is beautiful. There you go. So the butcher, by fulfilling his own interests, mean we all, or some of us, have a piece of meat on our plate, and that makes economics. That makes economic science. And in a book I recommend, which is entitled Who Made Dinner to Adam Smith, you know, the author says, how come you speak about butchers when you never went to the butchers? It was your mom who would put up a steak on your plate. And well, not to my surprise, because Adam Smith never got married. And do you know who he lived with? With his mom. Who would feed him? Who would make lunch and dinner? His mom. How sad. Poor woman. He would lay the table, you know, tidy up, and come on, Adam, you go and see Hume. Go and meet up with Hume and interpret the world. Well, you know, I think we had a leg pull throughout. No way, you know, could you ask Aristotle to think differently? You know, in the 4th century before Christ, or Adam Smith after Christ? You know, Adam Smith, you know, is not that long ago. Incredible, isn't it? Couldn't we ask Adam Smith to think differently? Oh, a philosopher. Oh, he is a I thought a philosopher was a person who thought differently by definition. But if philosophers thought exactly the same as commoners, you know, and ordinary people, why on earth should I study these philosophers in the history of philosophy? Or you get told, you know, there's this book of these thinkers who sacrificed their own lives because of their ideas. You know, they were sent to be burned or died in prison or whatever, or were poisoned or killed themselves before instead of giving up their ideas. Well, the argument is that we are to study them because they thought differently. Do you realize how, you know, that this makes no sense whatsoever? And then they tell you at the time they couldn't have thought otherwise. And then you answer, yes, but I study the philosophers I study because they thought otherwise. I think things need to be reconsidered. It is a very, very vicious circle. When Pythagoras talks about man as being the measure to all things, if we use the term woman, women are the measure to all things, we don't get the same feeling, do we? Men, we had to give them a piggyback, yeah? They were on our shoulders, like, you know, the mythological character who was carried on the shoulders of the giant. If they went that far, it's because they were carried on the shoulders of Galileo, of Kipling, and that allowed him to go further. But I did notice modestly that if men made so very many breakthroughs, is because we had to carry them on our own shoulders for them to travel longer and paint the Sixtine Chapel, the highlights of humanity, of humankind. All human beings go and visit the Sixtine Chapel, don't they? Sooner or later, you are to visit the Sixtine Chapel for what? What for? To see that God is male. But who on earth ever saw God? God. We read, you know, we read all these myths, and gods are male. Christianism, of course, Christianity has had a huge influence. It has built us so much as Greek and Roman philosophy. What is the most important word for Christendom? Padre, Father. Let's repeat it. Utter it with me. Padre nuestro. Oh, Father. Okay, well, there's a slight interpretation error here, a slight mistake. The only thing that a male cannot be is father, because he can only be a father if there is a woman there that tells him, I'm going to make you a father. I'll be a mother to your son or your daughter. So imagine how huge a mistake humankind has made, you know, the adventure of our world. The most important world in our culture is possibly that one, because it comes from the myths, it comes from philosophy, from laic philosophy or secular philosophy, and it comes from religion. Padre, Father, Padre, Father. And what we say when we go to Mass, you know, I can't withstand the chalice, yeah, as in religion, in Mass. How do I relate to knowledge, to research in university? Big, big, big question for the 21st century. How can I relate to things knowing that the same myths, beliefs, arguments that make me as the raped person, the raped woman? Imagine the concept of consent, sorry. In Christianity, and in actual fact, I find Christianity to be some progress compared to Greek mythology, because at least the Christian God is not a rapist. but that God wants to have a child or become a child himself or to come down to earth somehow. And this is very, very important in our own construction of what we are. And so that God asks a woman for her consent. You see some humbleness there. It is a very humble gesture, isn't it? Because bear in mind, God is omniscient, omnipresent. So how come an omnipresent God asks for consent? He could have said, I can have my own child, no women involved whatsoever, unlike Zeus, who Zeus to go down on earth had to take the shape of a swan, of a woman. No, the Christian God asks for consent, and so he sends an angel, the Annunciation. My students are not particularly knowledgeable or proficient in religion, but I tell them, please don't forget Christianism or Christendom, because it had made you too. It made you too, even if you are not religious or you don't know about religion anymore, because it's up to the 18th century that this is the case. So what concept of permission, of consent we have when God asks for permission from a 13, 14-year-old girl, Virgin Mary? Virgin Mary didn't do much. She was just a girl, an ordinary girl, a young girl. It could have been her or any other girl. So how can we internalize there is a consent relationship when she said, I accept, I will be a mother to your God, to your son? And so that is cross-cutting to our law, because law is also science. Civil law is a way of building everyday life.
And this is based in the following. When women had no rights, they were asked for consent to get married. That's one of the big fictions feeding inequalities. Wherever we look, it's such a huge inequality. It's an abysm. How do we rebuild our humanity? We must do it. How much time left, Maruxa? Oh, we've used up all our time. So very briefly, wherever you look, Nietzsche, my student's favorite author, when he's talking about women, well, it's only 10 pages of his work. So the rest of his work, this tells us that the rest of this work is for men, and those 10 pages are about women. And when she speaks about women, what does he say? Look, the same nonsense that any man full with prejudices. That's and like he says, like the women are the most dangerous toy, and men are warriors, and they like to play with women. So women are an enigma, and then enigmas are pregnancies. So Nietzsche, when he's conceptualizing women and our destiny for centuries, he's a lame-o, another lame-o. I don't like to use that term, but that's what it is. And this is something that our students should know, but also our colleagues, our philosopher colleagues should know, and they need to read us. They need to read the books that we write. It was shown by our Irish colleague that men do not read women's books, essays, apart from some that they say, some that say that we women don't exist. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much. And this is it for today's session. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. we will resume with plenty more examples from different disciplines, economy, law, sustainability. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Thomas, Anna, for these wonderful opening remarks. Thank you.